let me give you a little background on where psychiatry, as we know it today, the last, say, 100 years, fits in with this question of danger to society, danger to individuals, and the role that psychiatry has. Traditionally, doctors, not just psychiatrists, because we didn't have psychiatrists as they think of them now, doctors, say 200 or 300 years ago, in European Western society, were the ones who governments would turn to certify that the individual had a problem which justified confinement. And confinement was the in a place was where society would respond to the person being so different that something needed to be done. Now, in those days, it was not necessary that you had to prove that they were dangerous either to other people or dangerous to themselves. If they were considered to be mad, that was good enough. In other words, in need of treatment. And in the law, that was what was called, as lawyers began to develop, and we had development of legal scholarship, laws and courts which would weigh in on these issues, we gradually developed what we would now call an in need of treatment standard. And that is, you can't lock somebody up just because you disagree with them, just because they're a certain degree annoying, just because maybe they cussed you out. You have to get to doctors, or just because you want to divorce your wife, let's say. Let's move on to something where we're a little more modern in terms of understanding of the abuse of a group with relatively less power to defend themselves, women. Any group that didn't have enough power to defend itself might be more easily the subject of a standard of civil commitment, they would call it, forced treatment in an institution, because they were felt to be in need of treatment. But it wouldn't be just any treatment, it would be treatment in a place that was run by doctors. And it would be two doctors, generally, to pick a typical pattern, two doctors who had examined the person and, in their opinion, was in need of treatment, but would not accept treatment. Now, I think in today's society, European, American, and Western society, and in many countries in the world, it would be probably accepted that if we look back in history, we would find many, many examples where people would be committed, even though the law was not being followed. Because what does it mean to say somebody's in need of treatment? Who says they're in need of treatment? By whose definition? It's obviously using a medical standard, in need of treatment, yet the people who were being forcibly put in an institution wouldn't inevitably have a medical condition. They might have a condition that had to do with behavior. And unless you were to just define behavioral problem as a medical problem, you would have a question: is this something that qualifies under the law? Well, eventually, in the 60s, at the very time where I was in training to become a psychiatrist, that's when that standard began to be questioned. Some of you watching are old enough to remember that. Many of you watching would not remember it. It was long before you were born. So this might be the first time you've ever heard of it. But the way it was, and this is not something where I'm in disagreement with the psychiatric community, it's a historical fact, everybody agrees, that the states had laws which said, if you're considered in need of treatment, and as a result of your disorder, of the condition that you need treatment for, you will not accept treatment voluntarily, then a judge may order you into treatment. Now, of course, if we stop and think about it, who's to say that the reason you're not in favor of getting the treatment is because of the condition that you have? That is a nice little circular reasoning, and now I'm going from what is agreed upon history to Dr. Lee Coleman talking. I say it's a question that I'm going to answer, but I want to just phrase it as a question first. How do we know that the reason for the person refusing the treatment is because of the same problem that they need treatment for? Most psychiatrists say, yes, the problem is in the brain, in the mind. And the mind is why they cannot agree that they need the treatment. It's not fair to the patient. It's inhumane. It's positively a violation of the doctor's oath to do no harm, to deprive the person of the treatment that they need, when in fact part of the incapacity they're suffering from is in the same organ of the body which would be able to give the consent. I've just given the best version I can give of what is, I think, the mainline position of psychiatry and the law and society justifying the use of involuntary treatment. You have a disease of the very part of you that you have to use in order to give treatment. You don't understand why you need the treatment because of your disease. Well, I just want to start with, say, I wrote an editorial once in the Oakland Tribune. And of course, my colleagues will now, of course, be ready to say, oh my God, he's not going to cite a peer-reviewed article to justify his position. But I am going to cite an editorial I wrote merely to simply illustrate my position. Of course, it's not a scientific statement. This is not science we're talking about. We're talking about law, public policy, the role of an individual and society. That's what we're talking about here. The title of that editorial was Fear of Psychiatry. It's Not Irrational. That was the title of the editorial. And it was an article about why, when patients refuse treatment, it's often a justifiable fear, a rational fear, that psychiatrists have the power to do things that you don't want. And that is not something special about having mental problems. That is something that is natural and normal, because the idea that other people can decide on treatments, that everything your whole life experience tells you can be dangerous, and they're right to have such fear. Now, that doesn't in and of itself argue that the law is wrong. I will make other arguments as to why I feel that it is wrong. But it's just simply to say there should be a debate, and you can't defend the use of force with forcible treatment with patients simply by saying their mental state doesn't allow them to give informed consent. Because too often in the history of psychiatry, once you get 20, 30 years later, oh my goodness, the patients were not as wrong as we said they were. In fact, maybe we psychiatrists made a terrible mistake in using some of these treatments. Maybe we didn't pay enough attention. So, what I'm hoping to do with these statements is to open up in your mind and in your discussions and in your study what should be our position with regard to helping people who have genuine needs for help. And in my position, we have a stumbling block which is insurmountable as long as we maintain the power to force treatment on people.